Thank you. I would like now... Wait. Okay. I would like now to open the floor for questions, remarks to all our three panelists, if anybody has one. Dina.
You can ask, and I will repeat your question to the microphone if you prefer. You can also ask, and I will repeat your question. Thank you for the question. I'll just repeat the gist of it for anyone who might not have heard. So Berlin, too, has been changing over the last decade very dramatically. And the question was, what changes have I observed? Again, you know, as I said before, we are so concentrated in our own processes, in our own inner narrative, in the history of Israel and Israelis in Berlin, that sometimes we forget to look at other transformations that take place in Germany, in Europe as a whole, and indeed in Berlin. And my own observation has been that as a city, Berlin, which has already gone through quite a few chapters in its history, is writing another chapter now, which in some ways is strangely regressive from a long historical perspective, in the sense that the Berlin that grew, and grew quite artificially during the West-East divide, when the Federal Republic was only West Germany, and Berlin was held in an incubator, financially, economically, allowing youngsters to flock there in order to avoid the military service, among other things, and create an alternative community of radicals, partial outcasts, alternative artists, to which a lot of Israelis were drawn, I think, ever since the days of Dan Ben Amotz, but certainly in the 80s and 90s, Israelis who wanted to develop their own kind of youth rebellion, which was almost impossible to do in Israel, but were too intellectual to make do with the travel to India or to Thailand. They went to Berlin. And they found a Berlin which I think is now beginning to disappear. And it is disappearing not because the old bourgeoisie is taking over. There is no old bourgeoisie anymore. But because a new Beamtenstand is taking over. So an officialdom, you call it the Kanzlerei. I think that we're not allowed to say Kanzlerei officially, but certainly the whole new political heartland of Berlin, which was being built so dramatically when I lived there, is now a game changer, a deal breaker in the character of Berlin, as we knew it in the previous 30 or 40 years. And the kind of people who have flocked over from Berlin to Bonn, not only the politicians, but also a lot of people who give service to the politicians, and industries, and commercial enterprises are changing the city by radicalizing it, by commercializing it, to the detriment of the kind of Israelis and their German equivalents who used to set the tone. It's not quite over yet. You know, you still have the parade, the love parade, the gay parade, the old Kreuzberg, the new Kreuzberg. Things are still happening on the alternative fronts as well. But we are witnessing a transformation which is making Berlin closer to München or to Hamburg. And it's not the old Berlin anymore. So I'm saying that ironically, for a whole generation of Israelis who went there to look for the alternative Berlin, the lights are dimming on the alternative Berlin because the official Berlin, and indeed the commercial Berlin, is growing so strong. Just a side observation, but I think, yes. Probably maturing and growing up, yeah. It's a bit like the old hippies in the United States, mind you, yes. Again, I'm not being judgmental, just saying that the Israelis might have to look for a new place to seek out their radical instincts, maybe back to Tel Aviv, absolutely.
Okay,
I'm all for that.
over there. Yeah. Loud.
My name is Rejection, and I really feel those characteristics that you described. I lived part of my time in Berlin, and I have written about the German-Jewish relation. Looking back today, I see there's something common in the writing of Israelis about the new contact between Israelis and Germans. There seems to be a trend which I would call a Zionist one, to find an explanation and order, a way in modern Jewish life, which is being applied, in my view, to the new reality or realities which are developing from an Israeli point of view in Germany. Part of it also, in my view, is an idealization of Berlin. About Berlin, there are different views. If you are alone in my own, I have been living there. It is really quite confusing, quite chaotic, torn in different directions. And I think that many of the Israelis that live there suffer from that same phenomenon. Secondly, you reach a point when you start considering if that perennial Zionist trial to find a logic in modern Jewish life is really so good a solution. Perhaps there is not such a logic. Perhaps Jewish life has developed in Berlin or in New York or in Los Angeles doesn't have that logic that we try to attribute to it. Perhaps we are being victims of something, in my modest view, has a artificial dimension. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another one.
I was born in Belgium at the age of 4. My first meeting with German culture was the Stukas diving and shooting at us when we were running away from in Belgium and France, and even in the Bay of Biscay when there was a boat that was bombed as well by the Germans. Got to England and it was bombed again, and that was my first encounter with German culture. I came to Israel, I served in the Israeli army, in the Israeli government. I was in the embassy in Germany as well. And I can't understand why there's so much pride in developing a Jewish community in Germany. And why there's so much pride in developing a community there and not, in fact, instead of absorbing the Russian Jews in Germany, trying to get them to come to Israel, trying to strengthen Israel, not building a rabbinical college in a castle in Potsdam in order to strengthen the German community. I think it's a community which should be existing here. And we're sitting here, and I tried at the beginning of, I missed 2 days, I was only here 1 day, but I didn't hear any kind of discomfort of being in Germany, of Israelis leaving here and setting themselves up in Berlin. What are they? They're giving up what they're giving here. They're giving up for their children to build up a society here. They're sitting in Berlin with their children or grandchildren, or even some of the same people who were exterminating us 60 years ago. And we're sitting here, and I've been hearing only pride about the development of the Jewish community, which for me, I can't understand.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to say now has nothing to do with the topic of my talk before. And I'm speaking entirely in my private capacity as an Israeli, as a Jew, as a Zionist. What I'm telling you is very simple. It may sound as impolite, but it's what I think. And I mean, at my advanced age, I gained the right to say what I think and to think what I say. I think that what the German government has been doing with the Russian immigrants, this is the indulgence. This is the indulgence. Look at it simply. All these communities were uprooted, and then they can tell themselves very nicely, what do you want? We were nice to the Russian Jews. Russian Jews is good for them. They come here, they have nobody says it loud, but everyone thinks it. And the Russian Jews think it, because they know they come there, they've got all the, almost half of the German federal budget goes for social affairs. They come there, and it's good. So everyone is happy. Everyone is playing to the hands of the other. You think I like it? I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I think it's fake. I think it's fake for them. It's fake for them. Okay, but what do you mean fake? They came from an impoverished country, and they came to a paradise. For them, it's a paradise. As far as the Israelis are concerned, it's a mixed bag. What Professor Oz Salzberger has forgotten about Berlin, I'll never learn. I can only tell you that I come from a Berlin family, and although I was born here, and on a personal note, I can tell you that in 1956, my late mother decided that she doesn't want to live here and went to Berlin, because she could not get adjusted to the climate, to the people, to the culture, to the language, what have you. And she did what many others did. Not that she became rich, she had a very modest living. And she did nothing special. But this was her home. But this was one group of people who at a certain age, I mean, she was well over 50 when she went back, and she lived how she liked, and she died how she liked. And for 40 years she lived there. She went to the theater, she read books, she wrote, and she was happy in her own way, and that's okay. But she never thought that she's going to build the new Berlin culture, though what she remembered was Berlin in the 20s, when she met my father, who was a medical student in Berlin, and then they married. Okay. But what the people are going to do now, Israelis who go to Berlin, they just like it because it's close, it's so close, and in Berlin it's a complete laissez-faire. I've been there a few times. We have this free atmosphere. Nobody asks you anything as long as you don't cross the border or cross the line, and this is it. So they like it. So it's good for them, and the Berliners don't mind, and that's all. And it's not a marriage of all convenience. It's a life convenience. It's not in vain that Professor Oz says that there is no expat community, because everyone is on his own. That's what I understand, without much sociological explanation. And please, if I'm wrong, I stand corrected. Thank you very much.
לא? יש לך משהו חשוב? מה? יש לך משהו לא? לא. What I wanted to tell, to answer your question, or to relate to your question, is that we should look, and what I tried to do in my presentation is to show the beginning of this painful process. And there was a painful process. You need to look back to understand. I believe that Israelis are going today to Berlin or living in Germany, not only because it's nice and it's an open city, also because they feel good there. I believe as a result of this long process of accepting responsibility. I believe that most of the Israelis understand after this long, painful process, mainly that began in 1968, that eventually the Germans, took responsibility on the acts, one of the only countries, in history, that took responsibility on the acts that the Germans did. And this is one of the answers for going to Germany now. This understanding that this country actually eventually took responsibility for the deeds against the Jews during the war.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if I may, I would like to relate to what both gentlemen said. And in two different ways, I'm very sympathetic to what has been said here. But first, just to compliment Reuven Merchav's very touching memoir of your mother, I have a similar anecdote, and I think it fits with some of the issues raised here. When I lived in Berlin in the year 2000, my aunt from New York City, at the ripe age of 90, came to visit us. It was the first time she had been back to Germany for 70 years. She left in 31. She came to see us, only to see us, in Berlin in the year 2000. And she remembered every house in Grunewald in which a Jewish family lived. She remembered exactly. Henrietta lived down that road. And the Arendses lived there. She knew every house in Grunewald. And then she sits with us in a cafe on the Kurfürstendamm, and she says, es ist so vulgar geworden. And it was so she was so full of love for the Berlin she had lost. So full of love. She needed to come back just to see that she had really lost it, and the real crime was how vulgar it all became. I'm sure she's absolutely right. I want to say something, first of all, about the impossibility of thinking of renewal of Jewish life in Germany, because there is a part of me that is exactly with what you, sir, have said. And I opened my book asking the question, and I asked it very bluntly, how come every Israeli who lives today in Berlin doesn't hear all the time, day and night, the common scream of the mothers in Plaszow concentration camp when the Kindertransport went out? You have to hear that scream all the time if you are in Berlin. And if you don't hear it, something is wrong with your ears. And that was my opening question. I continued from there. But going back to the Zionism issue, I want to say something about Zionism. We think, and I think you, sir, have implied, that there was something very planned and orderly and rational about the Zionist attitude to Jewish history. We are supposed to leave Europe to come to rebuild our ancestral land. Everything else is chaos, and we Zionists are reorganizing Jewish history here in this country in our modern, rational, organized way. Zionism was never so organized. It was never so decisive. You are saying that Berlin is chaotic. Of course, Berlin is chaotic. Zionism in its primal phase was far more chaotic than that. The Zionists were adolescents who left a father and a mother in Europe. They were a generation of adolescents. Zionism itself, up until the Holocaust, was an adolescent movement with a father and mother in Europe. And it was orphaned unexpectedly. And it was cut off from Europe and from its, not only its roots, but also its pipelines, its feeders, its human feeders, its intellectual feeders. Unexpectedly and brutally. It remained orphaned. Some people, like my aunt and certainly Reuven's mother, were brave enough to go back as second-generation orphans. But we, the third generation's orphaned, we increasingly feel that we have real estate we need to pick up in order to sort our own identity, both as Zionists and with nothing to do with Zionism. Both ways. And when I say real estate to pick up, I do not mean the house in Grunewald. I don't want the house in Grunewald. I don't want that sort of real estate. I'm not asking for it. And my family was lucky enough not to need the reparations money that, of course, other families could not do without. What I need to pick up, and many of the young Israelis there, is a different kind of real estate. It is intellectual and even moral real estate. Because Berlin was once ours too. And some of our ancestors were Germans too, by their lives. And they created what we call modern Germany, and they were co-architects in what we call modern Europe. It is ours too. We are going back because we need to reclaim. And I'm not arguing with the question, should Israelis or should Jews live in Germany today? I'm leaving this out of the discussion. What I am claiming is that we have so much to look for there because our collective biography is even more chaotic than the city of Berlin. We need to sort out what had been brutally, quickly, and overwhelmingly cut off in our own human pipelines. That's what we are seeking in Berlin and elsewhere in Europe.
Okay. I would like to thank again all of our three panelists.